Welcome to our official first day of the convention. I want to welcome everybody and say thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited about all of the programming and the trainings that we have for you today. And I'm really excited that we are kicking it off with this incredible leader and this really important topic. I had a chance to see the Vera Action's presentation at the DNC when I first became chair last year. And I was so impressed with the sort of boldness in talking about crime and public safety and the acknowledgement that we as Democrats are losing on this issue, but in part because we at times are sort of afraid to tackle it. And so this training here is going to help all of us be able to feel much more comfortable and confident in being able to talk about these issues which are on the minds of voters in every part of our state. So we have an incredible speaker for you all. Insha Rahman is the Vice President of Advocacy and Partnerships at the Vera Institute of Justice and the Director of Vera Action, which is an independent but aligned sister organization. She leads the development of Vera and Vera Action's advocacy priorities and campaigns, partnering with governments and communities to end mass incarceration, fight for immigrants' rights, ensure dignity behind bars, and build safe and thriving communities for all. Insha is a nationally recognized expert on criminal legal reform and has been quoted as an authority in dozens of media outlets. Over the past year, she has spearheaded a national effort to win the narrative on safety, accountability, and justice, and to counter tough on crime rhetoric, especially during crucial election years like the one we are in. She was previously a public defender at the Bronx Defenders and is on a number of boards, including Aspen Institute's Criminal Justice Reform Initiative and Dignity and Power in Action. I'm so proud and excited that she is here, and I can't wait for all of you to hear her incredible presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Conrad, for inviting me onto this stage to have a conversation that is often really difficult for Democrats to have, which is how do we counter tough on crime rhetoric, and how do we actually turn the tables and own three values that we know voters across the political spectrum, doesn't matter where you live, the color of your skin, how much money is in your pocket, how old you are. We all want safety, we all want accountability, and we all want justice. So I'm going to put up a presentation. There you go. This is, if you learn nothing else from today, it's that there's actually a narrative that works really well to counter tough on crime. And that's to say we are serious about safety. So think about the last story you saw in the nightly news or in the headlines about crime, or the last ad you saw run by a candidate on crime. What was the emotion that it tapped into? All of us are different, right? We all have different reactions to things, but I think for most of us, the emotion that we felt was fear. And that is what the GOP taps into and drives whenever they go tough on crime, and we know they go tough on crime often. It's something we've all seen in recent election cycles, and it's something we're gonna see this year. So we know that voters, when they hear tough on crime, it taps into those fears, right? And we know when that narrative is left unchecked, it just hangs out there, and that fear is potent, and it drives people to vote in a particular way that they might not have if we had actually checked that fear and offered a path forward on how do we own safety, accountability, and justice. And so what would that other narrative look like, the serious about safety one? Let me play you a video so you can see, and this is the kind of rhetoric that we want to make sure voters are seeing this election year and into the future.
Keeping you and your family safe. Nothing's more important. We all deserve leaders who are serious about safety. Democrats work to prevent crime before it happens, not just react after, with real solutions to stop the violence and respond to crises. Promoting gun safety, treating addiction, and breaking the cycle of crime. Sending a trained specialist to people in mental health crises. Supporting the police to solve serious crime. Safety, accountability, and justice, because Democrats are serious about safety and solutions. Keeping you and your family safe. Nothing's more important.
You got it the first time. You don't need to watch it again. And let me just make sure I can make the screen big again. have heard an ad that sounds like that? Not many, right? Raise your hand if you have, or something that sounds like that. Well, I'm going to show you how those kinds of ads where we're owning, we can be serious about safety, we can have accountability, we can have justice, how that matches up to the tough on crime rhetoric that we see on the campaign trail in our day-to-day. And so in this slide, where there's a lot of information, let me tell you what you should get out of it. Just to give you a sense of how much money gets spent tapping into voters' fears about crime, put yourself back in late summer 2022. I mean, we are standing here today, 2 years after the Supreme Court decision on Dobbs. And we know that that energized and motivated and angered voters. And Democrats in July, August, into early September, they were up in the polls in the midterm election cycle, right? Voters were galvanized around the issue of abortion. And then what did we see from the GOP? We started to see attack after attack after attack, saying Democrats are soft on crime. And if you put yourself in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or where I'm from, New York or Oregon, after voters saw those ads, you literally saw Democrats start to slip in the polls because those attacks were left unanswered. And so the GOP spent just in that election cycle, really from September, October until November 8th, 2022, $157 million on attack ads calling Democrats soft on crime. $157 million. That's a huge sum of money telling voters that Democrats don't handle crime well, that you should be afraid, that you shouldn't vote for them because you won't be safe. And look, in the polls, we know when voters are asked, they say, kitchen table issues like the economy, putting food on the table, a roof over my children's heads. Those are the things that are top voting issues. But so is safety, because everybody wants to be safe, and it sort of lurks under the surface as an incredibly important issue for voters at the polls, even if it doesn't show up in the polling. But yet what we saw, look after November 8th, 2022, is that that tough on crime playbook actually didn't land in lots of parts of the country. And you might ask yourself, well, why? 2 reasons. One is voters, even if the political playbook on crime is left over from 1988 and the infamous Willie Horton playbook, that's not where voters are. Our voters have seen what mass incarceration has done to this country and to families. 1 in 2 Americans has either experienced a jail or prison cell themselves or through a loved one. They've also seen the promise of reform, that we can actually reduce the number of people getting arrested, going to jail or prison, and we can have public safety. And they've also heard tough on crime for over 3 decades, and they're like, well, this doesn't really work because I'm not really seeing my community or my neighborhood feel safer. And so what we saw is there's a number of candidates back in 2022, Senator John Fetterman in his U.S. Senate race, a number of other folks into 2023, mayors in Jacksonville, Florida, Chicago, Illinois, saying we can own being serious about safety, we can counter tough on crime with serious about safety. So let's talk about what a serious about safety message looks like. 3 parts, 3 values that we found from our research voters care about across the political spectrum. Some voters care about one value more than the other, but all voters care about all 3, which is safety. It's solutions that work to prevent crime, respond to crisis, stop violence. I see people taking pictures of the slides. Absolutely, we'll send them around, so you don't have to. We will send this around. It's available for everybody. We want people to take this in. Accountability. So we know people want to make sure that there is personal accountability if somebody does break the law, right? And what we found works really well to talk to voters is that accountability is not more punishment, but actually repairing and changing behavior to break the cycle of crime. And justice. People care about justice. They do, and that often gets lost in the political rhetoric and the election cycle, but voters care about justice. And justice is a system that works for all by relying less on incarceration and more on the things proven to help communities thrive. So I'm going to share 5 takeaways from our research, and we've been at this for about 2 years since the 2022 midterm cycle, really trying to understand what voters across the political spectrum are bringing to the ballot box when it comes to issues of crime and safety. And that's where our findings really tell us tough on crime isn't where we need to go. It actually doesn't work well. So what Democrats have currently, by and large, been doing, which is either doing nothing and sort of ducking and pivoting to talking more about abortion or democracy, not a winning strategy. Democrats also don't need to go, I too am tough on crime, which, let's be real, we've all seen that, right? I get the instinct. It actually doesn't work with voters either because they don't really think tough on crime works. And if you're going to vote for a tough on crime candidate, why wouldn't you vote for the original tough on crime candidate and not a poor facsimile, right? So 5 takeaways from our national research as well as state-specific research about how do we own safety, accountability, and justice and a serious about safety message. So takeaway number 1 is we can't let ourselves be defined as soft on crime by the opposition, and that's what happens when we're silent on this. We can literally make safety part of the kitchen table litany of the freedoms we care about by saying just one sentence, I am serious about safety. Democrats are serious about safety, and add that in addition to protecting your personal freedoms, your right to abortion, democracy, all of those things, put in a little word about serious about safety, get out in front of the soft on crime attacks with a strong message that we have the solutions that work to prevent crime, respond to crisis, and stop violence. Here's how we know that this works. So in a national survey, we asked voters across the political spectrum, when it comes to an approach to dealing with crime and safety, do you prefer a tough on crime approach, which is having tougher sentences for people convicted of violent crimes, maintaining strong bail laws to keep dangerous people in jail, and providing police more support and resources? Or do you prefer a serious about safety approach where we're fully funding things that are proven to create safe communities and improve people's quality of life, like good schools, a living wage, and affordable housing, and do more to prevent crime by increasing treatment for mental health and drug addiction and getting illegal guns off the street? So overall, nationally, and this includes everybody from liberal voters to independent moderate voters and even registered Republicans, 56% of Americans say, I want a serious about safety approach. When you pull out Black voters, and mind you, Black voters are twice as likely as any other voting bloc to say, I'm not just worried about crime in general, sort of that big city over there, the dog whistle. I'm worried about crime in my neighborhood, where I live, for my family. Despite Black Americans being more worried about crime than any other voting bloc, 72% say a serious about safety approach resonates with my values. That's the approach I want to hear politicians taking. We oversampled AAPI voters, Latino voters, same thing, 60 to 40. And even white voters, which includes a lot of conservative Trump voters, you can still see 52 to 47 prefer a serious about safety approach. We've tested this in the battleground states, 55 to 45 in Michigan, Pennsylvania. The trend holds true. If we were to test that in Washington, I am certain that trend would hold true. So the second takeaway is this, is you might be wondering, well, this serious about safety message, it sounds kind of like lefty liberal. Is it a little bit too soft? Turns out it's not. It's actually a message that holds white and independent voters, and it galvanizes the base of Black voters and young voters to actually turn out and vote. And here's how we tested this. So remember the ad we just saw, the serious about safety ad? So put yourself in Virginia back in the last election cycle, November 2023. Huge election year for Virginia, off-year elections, the biggest ones in the country. Everybody was up for re-election or election in the state legislature. And again, the GOP went hard that cycle on crime. And just in one election cycle, just in one state in Virginia, the GOP spent $25 million on ads attacking Democrats for being soft on crime. And what we did is an exit survey after the elections, and mind you, Democrats did fine. Abortion is a galvanizing issue. The fact that Democrats stand for democracy and freedoms is a galvanizing issue, even in a very purple state like Virginia. But what we did was an exit survey of Virginia voters, and we asked them, after seeing $25 million worth of ads attacking Democrats for being soft on crime, what's the approach to crime and safety you prefer? And we showed these actual voters 3 different ads. One of them was a GOP candidate touting a tough-on-crime approach and funding for law enforcement and law enforcement endorsements. We've all seen that ad, right? It's your typical GOP tough-on-crime ad. The second was we showed a Democrat, a black Democrat, who was being attacked as the defund candidate, the candidate who's soft on crime. And he did what Democrats often do, which is say, no, I too am tough on crime. And so he had a bunch of police endorsements and talked about gun safety and gun control. Then we showed voters the Serious About Safety ad. And we asked those voters, of these three ads, even if none is exactly right, which of them is most aligned with your views? And the results are pretty remarkable. Real ads, real voters who just came out of hearing a lot of tough on crime and seeing a lot of ads peddling tough on crime rhetoric. So you can see overall, 34% of Virginia voters preferred the Serious About Safety ad and said it most resonated with their views. So that's by a margin of over 10%, or about 10% compared to the other two ads. With independent voters, came neck and neck with the Democrat talking about gun safety. 29% said that's the ad I prefer. And then with registered Democrats, 54% said that Serious About Safety ad is the one that I agree with. Black voters, 47%, Gen Z voters, 37%. And there are arrows next to the black voters and Gen Z voters because we actually asked an open-ended question of why does this ad resonate with your views? And what black voters and Gen Z voters said is, if I heard a candidate talking like this about this issue, about talking about safety and justice, I'd be more likely to get out and vote. I'd be more likely to vote for them. So that's concrete proof that this is actually galvanizing, as well holds the more moderate and independent voters that we're all looking to win over and bring to the Democratic side. So the third takeaway is focusing specifically on independent voters, because we know we've got lots of them, even in this state that people think of as very blue. We know there's always independents or people who are just looking for a different approach, aren't sure about either party. And so what we did in the Virginia research, and we've done this nationally as well, we actually asked a bunch of questions and pulled out what independent voters preferred. And what we found is, overall, independent voters are more likely to trust the GOP on the issue of crime. As Chair Conrad said, Democrats are lagging on this issue, especially in voter trust. And yet, despite lagging behind in terms of trust, the Serious About Safety message wins over those independent voters. And so, again, we asked, which party do you trust more on issues of crime and safety? We've all seen this data nationally, here in Washington, everywhere else. By and large, the GOP has an advantage over Democrats. That's true, too, with independent voters in Virginia. By about 10 percentage points, they said, I trust the GOP more than Democrats on issues of crime and safety. Yet when we asked them that same Serious About Safety versus tough on crime approach, look at the middle bars. You can see independent voters, by a measure of over 20%, said, even though I trust the GOP more, even though I have concerns about crime, I prefer a Serious About Safety approach to a tough on crime one. Now, when it comes to policing, which we all know is where this issue really sort of gets down to ground zero, right? That's where every candidate we watch struggles, because you want to show that you support the police, but you also want to be cognizant of police accountability, making sure we're talking about issues that matter to voters, about good and effective and accountable policing. We asked this question in all of our national research as well as state-specific research. What do you want to hear from candidates when it comes to policing? So often, all we hear from candidates is, I'll fund the police, or we'll put more police on the streets. You're actually missing the conversation that voters want to hear. The top performing message, and this is true for Democratic voters, independent voters, and Republican voters, is we can support the police to do the difficult jobs they're tasked to do, and we can hold them accountable if they abuse their power or break the law. That performs 20 percentage points better than more funding for police or putting more police on the streets. And it performs even better than building strong bonds between police and the community, which also comes as a sort of second-tier preference for voters. Same is true for independent voters, and again, you see that first bar, the support and accountability message, it's actually the highest performing message with Republican voters too. And we've actually tested this in focus groups to say,
That actually kind of surprises us because I think all of us, the conventional political wisdom is when it comes to policing, you got to say, we'll fund them, we'll support them, and that's sort of where you got to go. But it turns out from talking to voters about this issue, they want policing, but they want better and more accountable policing, not just simply more policing or more funding for police. So you're really reaching that desire by saying we can support the police to do the difficult jobs they're tasked to do. And then nobody likes corruption. Nobody likes people who break the law, including when police officers do. And so that message of, and we can have accountability if they abuse their power, break the law, is the winning message. Now, fourth takeaway is it's one thing to go on the affirmative and have a serious about safety message and own the values of safety, accountability, and justice. But what do you do when you're under attack, right? And we've heard these lines of attacks. Well, under Democratic-run cities, there's more homelessness, open-air drug use, there's no consequences, criminals feel like they can act with impunity. I'm seeing somebody smile and nod knowingly. It's a thing that we hear all across the country. And those lines of attack, again, they're potent, but only if they're left unmet. And so here's a bunch of tested messages on how do you respond to those lines of attack on things like defund, retail theft, which is coming up a lot in cities across the country. And then increasingly, we're seeing this sort of migrant crime line of attack. We've got a tested message for that too. So there's a lot of text on this page, and again, we'll send these slides around. But here's your typical defund attack. The left has allowed a culture built on hating the police to drive decisions surrounding law enforcement. The defund the police movement is without a doubt one of the greatest dangers to public safety in our nation's history, and Democrats are responsible for it. The hostile climate for police has discouraged proactive police work. We can't expect the police to keep us safe if we aren't willing to keep them safe. We've all heard some version of this, right? And we've actually heard it from Democrats as well. So if you counter that not with, no, I too want to fund the police, or I support the police, which is having a conversation, frankly, about police and money and not about safety, you're missing voters and an opportunity to get on our own narrative playing field. So here's the response that actually works. I'm not about scare tactics or slogans, like my opposition, and I'm not afraid to have an honest conversation. We keep expecting police to solve every social problem, from kids skipping school to mental illness to homelessness to gun violence. No one profession can do that. We're spending $115 billion a year and putting too much on police departments. It's time to try out some promising new solutions to lift the burden. It's time for change, not blame. That outperforms the attack by 16 percentage points. Now, we tested this another way, where we put partisan labels on. The GOP candidate says the defund attack, and the Democrat says, I'm serious about safety, and has that response. Then we also tested it against a Democrat saying, you want to know who the real defunders are? The GOP and their lack of support for the FBI and their support for a convicted felon and, January 6th insurrectionists. We've all heard that line of attack recently too, right? We tested it, and here's what you get. So when the Democrat says, I too am tough on crime in response to the defund attack, when they say MAGA Republicans are pushing a soft on crime agenda to defund the police, pardon violent insurrectionists, and align with convicted criminals, their extreme agenda seeks to undermine the Justice Department, abolish the FBI. I support increasing funding for our police departments, while Republicans side with violent January 6th insurrectionists over law enforcement. The Democrats behind 7 percentage points. The GOP wins out with that tough on crime, fund the police, defund message. However, even with a Democrat candidate saying, I'm serious about safety, that I'm not about scare tactics and slogans, not afraid to have an honest conversation, you win out 4 percentage points. And again, you're sort of like, why? This doesn't totally, make sense with conventional political wisdom. It's because voters want to hear Democrats on their own narrative playing field with an affirmative message about safety, accountability, and justice, not about funding or defunding the police, not about tough or soft on crime, but serious about safety. So another example, retail theft. And this is really a proxy for sort of all of the disorder in big cities. Downtowns are out of control kind of a thing, increased homelessness, increased open-air drug use. We've heard this, right? In Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA, where I live in New York City. And so what we did was test, again, that split head-to-head message test of here's the attack from a conservative or a GOP. And when it comes to retail theft, it sounds something like this. We can thank woke prosecutors for letting American cities spiral out of control. People are scared to go into stores because of theft and looting. Hardworking employees and business owners are traumatized and scared to go to work. Organized retail crime is just happening brazenly. Evil is spreading across the country with thieves taking whatever they want, and prosecutors aren't doing a thing about it. In fact, woke prosecutors are against any charges or prosecution for theft. There are no consequences, and that's why criminals are so open, brazen, and violent about stealing. We've got to get tougher on crime. I'll start by making sure every thief is punished to the full extent of the law. Potent if left unchecked. If you respond with just a basic fact check, because if you look at the data, retail theft isn't out of control. You say, my opponent wants to use scare tactics to rile people up to win votes, but look at the data. There isn't a retail theft epidemic. We should do more to stop theft, but let's tell the truth about the problem and solutions. I'll work with police to reduce theft so our stores don't have to lock up basics like toothpaste and shampoo. Some people are stealing out of desperation and poverty because they're in survival mode. Throwing them in jail or charging them with huge fines won't change their behavior. It'll just make them more desperate. My focus is on holding people accountable in ways that actually stop the cycle of crime, make all of us safer. So if you go to the fact check and actually name retail theft isn't out of control, we do have real solutions, you're up by 4 percentage points. If you go serious about safety, you start with the value that people care about, which is we all deserve to be safe, you do even better. So here's how you do it. My opponent wants to use scare tactics to rile people up to win votes, but here's what I can tell you. We all deserve to live in safe neighborhoods and shop at places in peace. And you go right to, I'll work with police. Some people are stealing out of desperation, locking them up isn't gonna help. We wanna actually have solutions that hold people accountable in ways that stop the cycle of crime, make all of us safer. You beat the attack, 14 percentage points, 43 to 57. Again, getting on our own narrative playing field is the best thing we can do to own this issue and not lag behind the GOP in terms of voter confidence and trust that Democrats have real solutions that work for safety, accountability, and justice. So one more, and I know that this is a ton of text, it's hard to read, so I'm reading it aloud to you, and again, we'll send the slides around. But we've seen this idea of migrant crime and Biden migrant crime sort of coming up again and again. It's going to continue to come up, even in places that really aren't experiencing a lot of immigration or newly arrived migrants. We're still seeing this line of attack. Again, only potent if left unchecked. So here's your typical GOP attack on this. Cities are being overrun by an influx of new migrants causing chaos and crime. Democrats like New York City Mayor Adams are spending billions in taxpayer money to feed, clothe, and shelter illegal migrants, many of them criminals. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans are struggling just to pay bills under Biden's inflation. I'll deport criminals who come here illegally, and I'll use our military and police forces to do it. It's time to secure our borders, put an end to Biden's migrant crime, put Americans first. Now, that's actually playing into a number of different fears that everyday voters have who don't consider themselves and aren't racist or xenophobic, but they are like, well, I feel like I'm struggling, so why are we spending this much money on people who have just gotten here? Or, I don't think that I feel safe or my kids feel safe, why are we spending resources housing and feeding newly arrived migrants? So it's really tapping into, very cleverly, some of those fears. If you go tough on crime as a Democrat and basically say, I know we can't handle this influx, have a message something like this. The influx of asylum seekers is overwhelming places like New York and Chicago. New migrants are taking up resources and monies our state can't afford. We don't have the infrastructure to deal with them. We need urgent help from community partners and government leaders to make sure that these families have the tools to work and contribute to our communities. But we also need the federal government to take action now to increase border security, stop the influx of migrants. That's a very common Democrat response to this issue that we keep hearing again and again. We tested it. Turns out the Democrat loses 2 percentage points, 51 to 49. Basically, when you take elements and sort of play into, yes, we can't handle this, and allow that fear to continue that this is going to overwhelm us and we can't manage. If instead you say, we're serious about safety, and importantly, when it comes to immigration and migration, serious about safety, stability, and security is the message that works beautifully. Here's what it sounds like. My opponent uses lies and hate for political gain. Our forefathers would be ashamed of policies like family separation and mass deportation. Let's focus on solutions that live up to our values and make us safer. Let's secure our border and create a pathway to citizenship for immigrants who have lived here for many years. Let's fully fund things proven to improve safety and improve everybody's quality of life, like good schools, good paying jobs, healthcare, and affordable housing. I'm focused on making life safer, more stable, and more secure for all of us. It beats the attack 47 to 53, 6 percentage points. And here's why. Again, we tested what is it about this message. For one thing, it addresses the fear of, well, we need to put Americans first because we don't have enough to take care of everyone. So it actually gets at that. And then it makes the case that we can lift all boats. Everybody deserves to be safe, to live secure lives, to live stable lives. And that helps to, again, diffuse this us versus them dynamic that rhetoric around migration and especially migrant crime taps into. So let me just say, and I don't know how much migration and immigration is coming up in Washington, but it's coming up everywhere in terms of the national stage and national races. There are a couple of congressional races that really matter here in this state, so you'll probably hear it there. Here's a strategy for actually being able to inoculate on this, and I'm sure, as all of you know, immigration has literally risen to the top as a top polling issue for voters nationally. Don't know what the numbers are here in Washington, but I bet fear and concern about it is rising in the polls too. And so there's an anchor message that works every single time with this issue, which is let's work on making life safer, more stable, and secure for all of us. Then you inoculate against the Americans first sort of xenophobic attack and say, let's fully fund things proven to improve safety and everyone's quality of life. Good schools, good paying jobs, healthcare, and affordable housing. And then you also say we need a balanced approach to fixing immigration. We need border security and a pathway to citizenship for immigrants who've been here many years. And you go on the attack and you put your opposition on the defense by reminding people our forefathers would be ashamed of candidates using lies and hate about immigrants for political gain, and spending taxpayer money to bus migrants across the country is a political tool to get attention and divide us. And then remind people that people who are coming to this country are just like all of us. Migrant families are mothers, fathers, children, and grandparents who are fleeing danger, not causing it. Like us, they want safety, stability, and opportunity for a better life. All of that performs better than saying we need to close the border, mass deportations, we can't handle the influx of new migrants to this country. And then right in the right-hand side, we actually pulled out for independent women and independent men. If you go conservative Democrat and say we can't handle this, you lose independent women on this issue, -25, independent men, -33. If you go to this serious about safety, stability, and security message, you're up 9 percentage points with independent women. It's a huge swing, over 30%. And with independent men, you basically draw even, -1, which is remarkable to win independent men over on this issue. Again, what's the secret sauce here? It's getting off the opposition's narrative playing field onto our own. So one more tidbit of data, and I know I've thrown a ton of data at you, but this is a really novel issue for us as Democrats. It's not one that we've taken on seriously, but as we see ad spending on crime, as we see this issue being one that voters increasingly say they care about, we have to take it on. And so we did a test of what's the right messaging frame that moves voters on their trust for Democrats on this issue. And it turns out safe communities, not gun violence, not crime, not public safety, it's the messaging frame that moves voters towards Democrats and fills a trust gap. So let me explain this slide. We did in our national research a test of 4 different messaging frames, and we asked voters and survey takers before any messaging treatment, how likely are you to trust Democrats and the Republicans on this issue? And then after messaging, how likely are you to trust Democrats and Republicans on this issue? And you can see when the frame is reducing crime, so a narrative that people associate with the GOP, Democrats are down 12 before any messaging. They're still down 10 after messaging. There's very little movement in voter trust on Democrats on this issue. If you go to improving public safety, which sounds a little bit more like what we often see Democrats say, still very much a Republican messaging frame. Democrats are down 6 before any messaging treatment. They're still down 6 after. If Democrats go to reducing gun violence, which we know is a really important issue for voters, very important for Democratic registered voters, for independent voters too. Turns out Democrats already have an advantage here. Voters are more likely to think Democrats are good on this issue than Republicans, no surprise. So Democrats are already up 10 percentage points. If after messaging really exclusively on gun violence and gun safety, which is what Democrats often do, talking about crime, you're still up 8 percentage points. Again, you haven't shifted, haven't moved the needle, and it's because you don't gain any extra points for talking about the thing voters think you're already good at. Then you go to that third line of making communities safe. Before any messaging treatment, voters think Democrats are down 6 in terms of trust and handling on this issue compared to the GOP. You can see literally it's 0. Democrats and the GOP are even in voter trust on this issue after messaging to say making communities safe. So this might not be the winning issue, at least not yet, because we're early on in figuring out how do Democrats own this and own a narrative around safety, accountability, and justice. But it's an issue that we can at least inoculate on in this cycle if we actually take this advice, take it on, and start owning being serious about safety. And so when it comes to basic policies, again, driving this point home, maybe beating a dead horse, you can see when we ask policy-wise, which policies do voters think are more effective to improve crime and safety in communities? Putting 100,000 more police on the ground to improve safety, which is currently President Biden's planned policy for this issue. Only 43% say, I think that that is effective. Harsher sentences, mandatory minimums to keep people in prison. Only 38% of voters say, I think that's effective. What's seen as more likely to be effective? Working across party lines towards a common goal of safe communities, 63%. People are really tired of the divisive rhetoric on this issue. Safety matters for everybody. It's a kitchen table issue. And they want to see candidates, elected leaders come together and just solve the problem and make communities safe. And people understand that increasing access to mental health care is a big part of getting safer. 61% say that. Building trust between police and the community, 61% say that too. Making sure safety, not wealth, determines who stays in jail pending trial. That's bail reform, right? To take money out of the equation and make sure public safety is what judges consider. 57% say, I think that that would be an effective approach to addressing issues of crime and safety. Likewise, addressing people's underlying economic conditions, addressing poverty, mental health, substance abuse, 56% say that would be an effective policy solution. So now I'm going to turn to real-life examples of how this works. That's a lot of data, and if you are maybe thinking, well, that's the test tube of data, that feels right in a lab, I don't know how this plays out in the real world. Well, let me give you some examples. So first of all, I know all of you remember the New York 3 special election, the empty George Santos race, right? Happened in February of this year. And I know, great, you should absolutely clap. It was an incredible victory for Democrats, incredible victory. Very, very purple district in Long Island. I live 20 miles away from there in Brooklyn. And it's an issue, it's a race where the issues of crime and immigration were the top issues for voters. It's actually a great race for Democrats to look across the country to be like, how do we win on this issue? And let me tell you something in this room. I think a lot of us who are reading the national papers and the headlines about this race, the story on Tom Suozzi is he ran like a Republican, right? How many of you saw that in the news? Speaker Mike Johnson actually said the day after Suozzi won, well, of course he won. He ran like a Republican. That's actually not true, and Democrats shouldn't let that narrative stand. What Tom Suozzi did is he ran like a really smart Democrat who's listening to voters. And what he did at each and every turn was not let himself get out-talked. The volume issue matters, right, to voters. He talked about immigration. He talked about crime. He owned the issues that mattered to voters in that district. And he owned a Democratic message that was on his own narrative playing field about being serious about safety, stability, and security. And so you can see in this research, we did an exit poll of New York 3 voters. We asked Swazi voters, voters who consider both Swazi and Mazi Philip, and Philip voters, what are the top issues for you? Abortion, immigration, guns, inflation, cost of living, crime. That was it for all of these voters. And then we asked them, what were your 2 top voting issues, and then how much did each candidate make it a priority? And you can see Swazi actually closed the trust gap and the volume gap. He was behind Mazi Philip on immigration, about 20 percentage points, which, considering she talked about nothing else on the campaign trail, that's pretty remarkable when he talked about abortion, democracy, immigration and crime, and how to make communities safe. And then you can see on crime, he literally closed the gap within 10 percentage points, which again, pretty remarkable for a Democrat. And then we asked voters in that district, when it comes to immigration and crime, what are the policies you favor? Exactly what we're talking about. Policies of safety, security, and stability. So adding more border agents to safely process people at the border and increase applications for asylum and processing. Add more immigration judges, and also have a pathway to citizenship for people who are here. Likewise on crime, people said, getting illegal guns off the street, building trust between police and the community, increasing access to mental health care. And on both immigration and crime, we can see that policies like deporting everybody, closing the border, or getting tough on crime, putting 100,000 more police on the streets, all performed less well with those voters than actually the safety, security, and stability proposals and that approach. So again, real life example, really hard fought race, and really important to learn the right lessons and tell the right story for Democrats in it. So another quick example, President Biden and his evolution from going tough on crime to serious about safety, and you can really map it through 3 State of the Union addresses. And I will say this, I think the president still has some work to do to get to where voters actually are on this issue. It's just the truth. He is the president who, was behind the 1994 crime bill and has been for most of his career a sort of tough on crime Democrat. And you could really see that in the 2022 State of the Union, right? We were not even 2 years after the Summer of George Floyd protests. Defund felt like a very potent line of attack against Democrats. Democrats didn't have much of an answer. What was the most memorable thing that President Biden said in the 2022 State of the Union address? Fund the police, fund them, fund them. That was the thing that got the most press, right? And then fast forward a year later to 2023, February of that year, Tyree Nichols, young black man driving his car home, was murdered by police officers in Memphis, Tennessee. That video made the rounds. His parents were going to be in the audience during the State of the Union address. What would the president say about policing? You can't say fund them after we watched a vicious act of violence happen on camera and literally reverberate around the nation. And so we actually worked with the Congressional Black Caucus to get the president some language that would actually move forward on supporting the police, but also holding them accountable. And here's what you heard the president say. We know police officers put their lives on the line for us every single night and day. And we know we ask them in many cases to do too much, to be counselors, social workers, psychologists, responding to drug overdoses, mental health crises, and so much more. We ask too much of them. But what happens to Tyree in Memphis happens too often. We have to do better. We need more first responders, professionals to address the growing mental health, substance abuse challenges, more resources to reduce violent crime and gun crime, more community intervention programs, investment in housing, education, and job training. All of this can help prevent violence in the first place. And when police officers or police departments violate the public trust, they must be held accountable. So remember after that State of the Union address, was there any negative media about this? Was there any backlash to him saying that? No, because it actually comported with what most Americans believe we should expect from our police department and from our government when it comes to crime and safety. And then fast forward to this year, March, we see amazing declines and really important, hard-fought declines in crime across the country. And the president said, all Americans deserve the freedom to be safe. Crime has gone down, and what we need to do is help cities invest in more community police officers, more mental health workers, more community violence intervention. It's all of the policy things we're talking about that are part of a serious about safety approach. So we are seeing this literally at the top of the ticket on down to many, many candidates and leaders who are running who can really speak to what our voters want. Now, we already talked about Tom Suozzi doing an amazing job actually in a really hard race owning this message. Here's a few other examples. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, that race last year, crime was the issue for voters. And what we found in an exit survey we did there was the same thing. If you speak to concerns about safety, you own the issue, you don't cede ground and let your opponent talk more about the issue, then having a serious about safety approach with safety, accountability, and justice policy proposals, that's the winning formula for voters. We saw that even in a very purple city like Jacksonville, Florida, which has more registered independents and Republicans than Democrats. Donna Deegan, a Democrat, first Democrat to be running that city in a very long time, big city. She got attacked for being a Black Lives Matter activist. She showed up at some Black Lives Matter protests, back in 2020. She supported a serious about safety approach to policing and safety. She got attacked for being the defund candidate. She owned her ground. She stood on a serious about safety message. She won. Same with Summer Lee in Pennsylvania in a really difficult primary where from a Democrat, she was attacked for being soft on crime. Again, she stood firm on serious about safety and she won. So this isn't just a test tube of research. We can see it working in real life examples. So I know many of you here are going to be on the doors, you're going to be talking to voters, you're going to be engaging in this issue, and I hope that this has been helpful so that when the issue around, well, crime seems like it's going up and I don't think Democrats are doing anything about it, you have something to say, you can lean into the issue. But let me leave you with 4 tips. The first is that you have to respond with empathy, and people's values around safety, accountability, and justice matter. So anytime the conversation comes up, don't go right to data, don't tell them what the facts are about crime rates. Go to, look, we all deserve to be safe. You know what we all want to see? We all want to see safety, we all want to see accountability, we all want to see justice. And different voters care about different values more. Younger voters, Black voters, we've seen care deeply about accountability and justice. They also care about safety, let me be clear about that. And even more moderate voters who are focused more on crime and safety, they can start through the safety door and walk through to get to accountability and justice. You just got to meet them where they are to bring them there. Now, you've got to also name what the villain is and just say very bluntly, look, tough on crime scare tactics are actually what's holding us back because they get in the way of having an honest conversation about real solutions that work to prevent crime, respond to crisis, and stop violence. Just name it. You don't have to be afraid of it. It really, really works to turn down the volume, turn down the temperature, be able to have that conversation. Now, I say this all the time, and I am such a researcher's researcher. I love data, and I want to tell people, well, actually, the fact that you think crime is going up is wrong. Here's what's actually happening. Does not work. Use empathy to persuade, not data, because if people think the sky is pink, doesn't matter how much you tell them the sky is blue. It doesn't matter, right? And so I say this all the time. Countering falsely held beliefs with empathy is more persuasive than contradicting with data. Arguing about crime statistics, for example, with legislators or the public isn't effective. But when we talk to journalists and the media, we absolutely should be setting the record straight. It's really important that media tells an accurate story about what's happening with crime and safety. But when you're on the doors talking to people, go to empathy and values, not data. Where data does matter, though, is when you talk about real solutions. And people want to hear, well, there's this great program in Denver that started 2 years ago, and it actually reduced rearrests by over 30% because what they did was send mental health crisis first responders when somebody was decompensating on the street. They sent specialists who know how to get people into housing if somebody appears to be homeless. Those are the kinds of programs that if you talk about granularly with people on the doors, you actually see them sort of go to, we have real solutions that work, and they aren't then vulnerable to the scare tactics. So many more things to say here, because this is just such a rich and important issue. But I would love to hear from you. How is this coming up here in Washington? What questions do you have? What concerns do you have? What skepticism do you have? Looking forward to having this conversation. And again, my email address is here. And as I've said to Chair Conrad, I would love to work with each and every one of you if this is an issue you want to take on, so we can actually turn the page, get off the tough, soft on crime debate, and start owning serious about safety and leading with values that all Democrats care about and all voters care about, which is safety, accountability, and justice. Thank you so much. If people have questions or reactions, comments, I know that there are mics here. Maybe people are running them around. Come on up. Please share. See one person coming up. Thank you. Oh, doesn't look like it. Why don't I give you this?
I'll never give it back to you. Thank you. Mine is the recurring issue of immigration. In 13 and 14, we passed a big bill. Then the Republicans refused to do anything in the House. And our own representative, Reichert, refused to sign the discharge petition. So what, and they're doing that again now. Is it okay to say they're against improving the immigration issue? How do we deal with that?
It's such a great question. So we've been testing this since, you know, the new way of the immigration sort of fear-mongering, I would call it fear-mongering. It's just crime dressed up as immigration. It's tapping into all the same fears. And so just like with crime, actually saying, that's a scare tactic that's trying to rile us up and divide us. What we want are solutions that work for all of us to have safety, security, and stability. What we need our Democrats to do, and then you finish the sentence of what you need them to do. But it works like a charm, because what you need to counter is when you're going tough on immigration and tough on the border, you're playing into people's fear. You just named that that's a scare tactic. And nobody likes to feel like they've been had, right? And so when you say, and what I'm here for are real solutions, what we need from our legislators are real solutions, that brings people along to hear you on exactly what it is that we want to see happen that isn't the sort of tough on crime, tough on the border stuff that we're seeing right now. I think we're trying to get it turned on. Thank you.
Very good. Well, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep, we can hear you.
I want to thank you very much. You did a superb presentation, one of the best I've ever seen.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
And I'm an expert in my own mind. Okay. I want to succinctly put, safety is proactive. Tough is reactive. Mm-hmm. And like my wise Sicilian mother said, a stitch in time saves 9. Mm-hmm. Thanks again.
Thank you. One of the messages that we've found so effective is we want to prevent crime before it happens and not just react after. It goes right to your point about what safety is. It's proactive. Crime is reactive. I appreciate that.
Is it all right if we rotate mics? I think we've done.
Oh, sure, yes. Sorry, I didn't even see you. I'm glad you said something.
That's all right. I think I just want to echo the last speaker. I mean, thank you for the presentation. It's really clear how you're taking the approach of treating the cause versus necessarily the symptom, proactive versus reactive. I'm curious from a messaging standpoint, and you know, we're serious about safety or we're tough on crime. I'm just curious if there's if it has to be either or if it can be an and. Because when you're showing the attacks that Republicans are providing and then the various responses that we can see and then seeing how voters respond to it, it seems like it is short-term and tangible for being tough on crime, yep. But then also serious on safety seems long-term and aspirational.
Yep.
So for voters, I'm just thinking, what is going to be more the short-term need that they have, how are they going to vote, but then also taking on experiences I have, like lived in Singapore for 3 years,
Yep.
right? And they're extremely safe. I'm sure, a lot of this audience has heard the stories about it where, no gum, people are caned, no graffiti, right? But they're serious on crime as well.
They're very tough.
So I'm just curious if there is that kind of blend, how we incorporate that in the messaging, maybe versus making the voter think it's either or.
Yep. So one of the things that's really important to do is when we say, I'm not about scare tactics, I'm about solutions, both immediate and long-term. That's what actually helps you get to the serious about safety thing isn't some aspirational dream that might come to fruition 10 years from now. The problem with going tough on crime or even using that rhetoric is that you're just reinforcing your opposition's narrative. And so if you even repeat that or say smart on crime or tough on the root causes of crime, we've heard Democrats try all of these, we've tested them out, it still keeps the voter, the person you're speaking to, in favor of the candidate who sounds like that. It's why doing a hard pivot and saying we're serious about safety, here's what that means. No more tough on crime scare tactics, no more trying to rile up fear. What I'm here for is real solutions, both for immediately addressing with urgency the issues that are plaguing our communities, and to invest in the long-term things that we know actually improve everyone's quality of life. People love that because they're like, great, I get it. I am more than happy to invest in long-term things if I feel like you're hearing me on the immediate as well. So it's a really good point you raised because it is the skepticism I hear when I do this presentation to folks. They're like, that sounds a little bit like off in the distance. But actually just naming solutions are both immediate and long-term takes care of that problem.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. Okay. Sorry, we only have time for one more question, but I will be here milling around in the back if folks want to continue talking.
I also wanted to thank you. This is very exciting. Have you done any analysis on how this interacts with libertarian talking points about reducing the scope of what the police are doing and how that was affected? Was there any analysis on how this message interacts with that one?
So in some of our national research, we actually pulled out different voting blocks, including political affiliations like libertarians. This messaging performs incredibly well with libertarian sort of independents and conservatives. I don't know if that's a great thing for you, but it works great. And we haven't tested necessarily libertarian talking points on this, but again, like I said, this is a big tent message. The idea is we hold independent and even soft conservative voters, and we really motivate Democrats as well as Black voters and young voters. So it's a big tent message on purpose, and yes, it works great with libertarians as well. So thank you again. I'll be around. Please feel free to come talk some more. I welcome it. Thank you so much for having me here.